You don't understand. You don't truly understand why you're standing there today. You don't truly understand why I authored that resolution. Just because you don't get your way, you can't come to the well, bring your friends, and throw a temper tantrum with an adolescent bullhorn. What you could do, you could file a piece of legislation that maybe you'd do that instead of sitting back and criticizing folks that's worked really hard for the past decade to do so. That might be a place to start. But certainly don't start by commandeering the well while we're conducting business here in this Tennessee General Assembly. That's why you're standing there, because of that temper tantrum that day, for that yearning to have attention. That's what you wanted. Well, you're getting it now.
How many of you want to be spoken to that way? We're not talking about politics. We're not talking about even gun violence. How many of you would want to be spoken to that way?
I don't personally want attention. What I want is attention on the issue of gun violence. But instead, we're here with the resolution you put up talking about expelling me for advocating for ending gun violence in the state of Tennessee.
And so the message for all the people in Nashville who decided to expel us: you can't expel hope. You can't expel justice. You can't expel our voice. And you sure can't expel our fight. We look forward to continuing to fight, continuing to advocate until justice rolls down like water and righteousness like an ever-flowing stream. Let's get back to work.
It is a bill that is squarely designed to make the people and our culture more virtuous, and frankly, virtue is something that we're lacking a bit in our culture right now, and it's one of the reasons that our culture is struggling as much as it is.
How remarkable that you think you know what all Americans, all Tennesseans believe. And that if we are not supportive of this very narrow, discriminatory view, there's something wrong with our virtues. Transgender people are people, Representative, and deserve to be treated as such by this body too.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Senate Bill 420 simply asks the governor to redesign the state seal to include the words "In God We Trust" on it.
So it is interesting that we are seeking to put "In God We Trust" on our Tennessee Great Seal, and we haven't even had a conversation about which God we're talking about. I'm really worried that we are pontificating and painting on our Great Seal a God to bow down to who is not the God that loves and cares for everybody, but instead might be a God who idolizes and who supports white supremacy, capitalistic exploitation, or patriarchy.
The reason that I believe the sponsor of this legislation, of this resolution, spoke that way is because he's comfortable doing it. Because there's a decorum that allows it. There's a decorum that allows you to belittle people. We didn't belittle nobody. What we said was that we cannot be beholden to gun lobbyists, to the NRA. We can't be beholden to organizations that don't want to see us make progress on gun violence. We can't be beholden to folks who don't want to see us help save our communities and protect them. But there's something else I think that the sponsor of this resolution has alluded to, and there were a few things here that you said that I want to address. He called a peaceful protest a temper tantrum. Is what's happening outside these doors by Tennesseans who want to see change a temper tantrum?
I'd much rather be talking with you about legislation to protect Shelby County and to protect our communities than talking about why we don't deserve to have our representation lost because we came to the well of this house saying we've got to do something. That's what I would like to be doing. And so you brought attention or tried to bring attention to me, but I want to turn the attention to the people. The people who will never be able to throw a temper tantrum for gun violence. You know, the Larry Thorns, the Catherine Kuntzes, the Mike Hills, the Cynthia Peaks, the Evelyn Decaus, the Haley Scruggs, the William Kennedys, who will never have a chance to throw what you call a temper tantrum for justice, for gun reform, for the ending of gun violence. They'll never have a chance because we haven't taken our oath seriously, because we don't take people who we disagree with seriously. We tell them, you just are throwing a temper tantrum. And again, these are the same folks who live in one of the greatest democracies, as we've been told, in the United States of America. A place, in an institution, in fact, I would argue, that was built on protest. An institution that was built on people throwing temper tantrums against injustice and what they viewed as injustice. It isn't a temper tantrum to say that kids should actually go to schools that are safe. Neighborhoods shouldn't have to have thousands of police officers to be safe. We shouldn't have to worry about going to the grocery store, as in some cases going to the movie theater, and someone coming with an assault rifle and killing us. That's not throwing a temper tantrum, sponsor. That's just asking for us to do right. We're going to continue to fight to ensure that more lives are not lost to the epidemic of gun violence in our communities. And so, yes, if I'm expelled from this house, I will not have the opportunity to fight for that legislation as a member, but you can believe that I will continue to fight for our communities and to fight for just legislation in the state of Tennessee.
We've got a problem in this state. We got a proliferation of gun violence because of policies and practices and legislation coming from the state legislature of Tennessee. Reducing the permitless carry, removing the permit to carry weapons, reducing the age from 21 to 18, saying that to fix school shootings, just arm teachers. We've got a problem in Nashville, and it's called a promise that they're holding on to with this status quo. Yeah, see, their allegiance is to the way that things are. Their allegiance is to business as usual. Their allegiance is to the National Rifle Association. Their allegiance is to the Tennessee Firearms Association. But when we went to the well of the House, myself, Representative Johnson, and Representative Jones, what we did was say we have an allegiance to a people. Yeah. People who are tired of business as usual. Yeah. People who are tired of same old politics. People who are tired of same old politicians. We've got people that we have an allegiance to who are willing to march for justice, who are willing to fight for justice, who are willing to vote for justice. And it is that spirit which I will head back to Nashville with. And what we have shown here in Shelby County, what we have shown here in Memphis, Tennessee, with my fiance, my brothers, my family, my parents, and my family here, is that we do not speak alone. We speak together. We fight together.
The purpose of this bill is to strengthen the prohibition on the divisive concepts that are part of TCA 49-719 and promote freedom of expression and educational excellence. The impact is to keep colleges about advancing knowledge and not advancing personal, political, or social agendas.
This is a deeply concerning bill, because it is continuing a pattern of practice that is harmful to all people. When you begin to attack education and educational institutions that seek to tell the truth about racism, sexism, these other quote-unquote divisive concepts, when you try to control what a person thinks, then you are assuming the role of God rather than allowing the freedom of thought that built American educational institutions. I'll read some of this bill because I've got some folks here from Memphis and folks who are watching who need to see what the Tennessee General Assembly is calling divisive in our time. An individual, by virtue of the individual's race or sex, bears responsibility for actions committed in the past by other members of the same race or sex. This is to prevent white folks in particular for being told they had anything to do with enslavement. This is an individual should feel discomfort, guilt, anguish, or another form of psychological distress solely because of the individual's race or sex, a meritocracy which does not exist because a society that committed genocide against Native Americans, enslaved black African American people for over 250 years cannot be a meritocracy because we didn't all start at the same place. But you will not be able to say a meritocracy is inherently racist or sexist or designed by a particular race or sex to oppress another sex, despite the fact that in the United States of America's Constitution that we all swear an oath on, black people were considered 3/5 of a person. Only rich white men could vote, not women. But you tell us that those things we wouldn't be able to talk about if we operate business as usual and not do the work of justice. America is redeemable. The state of Tennessee is redeemable. But if we do not do the work of repenting through true education, by telling the truth, or as Memphian Ida B. Wells says, shining the light of truth upon our institutions and upon our lived experiences, which has made it much more likely for you to stand there than for me, if we do not tell the truth about our past and our present injustices. The state of Tennessee, the United States of America will not be redeemed. This is the work that we should be committing to, not banning people's ability to think critically about how we got to where we are, because we're trying to preserve a status quo that has hurt us. But I've got good news. No matter what you do, people always rise. Thank you so much. My concern about this bill is that it is anti-transgender people and children. It seems that we are persisting on a path of legislating discrimination and inequity. And I am wondering, Representative Bulso, what you're going to do in order that we stop moving forward legislation that attacks LGBTQIA children.
Representative Bulso.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I would disagree with the premise of the question. This is a bill that I think advances a different view, what I can call the American view. As you know, in one of our country's founding documents, Thomas Jefferson wrote that we hold these truths to be self-evident, which recognizes, one, that there is such a thing as truth, and not just that, but it's something that is capable of being understood. Some truths are so clear that they are, quote, self-evident. This is legislation that is designed to make our citizens more virtuous, which is the very reason that we have a government, a constitutional republic in the first place, as represented by Thomas Jefferson, Alexander Hamilton, John Adams in our founding documents.
Out of order.
It is so interesting that you changed the words of Thomas Jefferson from what he actually wrote, which was all men are created equal and endowed by their creator with certain inalienable rights, and that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. And it is also interesting that all of the names that you mentioned who built the foundations of this country were elite, slave-owning white men. It is fascinating that you think those are the virtues that we need to propagate and support by by passing anti-transgender children legislation. And how remarkable that you think you have the American view. The lack of democratic behavior, the lack of supporting of inclusion, the lack of supporting people for who they truly are, that is against who we are. That's why you even had to try and change the name from all men to all people. Well, transgender people are people, Representative, and deserve to be treated as such by this body too.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Senate Bill 420 simply asks the governor to redesign the state seal to include the words "In God We Trust" on it.
Thank you, Speaker. We all got to preach from time to time, because the art of preaching is professing a gospel in the Christian faith or in any faith about love and justice. You have brought before this hallowed house a piece of legislation to encourage the governor to submit a design of the Great Seal of the state of Tennessee by July 1st, 2025, that incorporates the language, quote, "In God we trust." Professing, as I assume you are trying to do, that here in the state of Tennessee, it is in God we trust. A God, as my colleague spoke about, who cares how we act and how we treat the most marginalized. A God who cares about how we act and how we treat the poor, those who've been pushed to the periphery. In God we trust is what we are seeking here, to encourage our governor to add to our Great Seal of the state of Tennessee. And I have to wonder, which God are we trusting in? Because we all have different faiths and backgrounds and traditions and beliefs. And I welcome the clergy here from around the nation who believe in a God that forces some people to march for justice. A God that forces some folks not to silence the voices of people who are marginalized and pushed to the periphery. So it is interesting that we are seeking to put "In God We Trust" on our Tennessee Great Seal, and we haven't even had a conversation about which God we're talking about. And some people here have these gods that they worship. Some of us have these gods that we bow down to. Some people here have these gods that we love and that we idolize, that silence voices and shun the poor and pass legislation to silence the majority. Some people have this God that they worship, and I think in this house of conversation and this hallowed house of debate, there should have been more conversation about which God we were putting our trust in, because I'm concerned that the God that you are encouraging the governor of this state to put on the Great Seal of Tennessee to represent all 7 million of us in perpetuity is not the same God we trust with inclusion. It's not the same God we trust with elevating the lowly. I'm worried that we're not talking about the God that pushes people from the periphery to the center. I'm worried that we're not trusting in the God that does the work of justice and love. I'm really worried that we are pontificating and painting on our Great Seal a God to bow down to, who is not the God that loves and cares for everybody, but instead might be a God who idolizes and who supports white supremacy, capitalistic exploitation, or patriarchy. And we haven't had a conversation in this hallowed house about what God we're trusting in. Is it the same God that has brought us to this place through liberation? The God who has ensured that even amidst, some might say, expulsion, resurrection happened? Or is it a God of silencing? We didn't have a conversation about what God we're trusting in. And that's really important if you're going to say that this God that you want us to have our governor to put on the design of the Great Seal of the state of Tennessee is going to represent all of our different perspectives and identities.